Hey guys, it's Ollie from Rad Season. Welcome to another episode of the Rad Season Show. I'm incredibly excited to be joined today by adventurer, runner, obstacle race enthusiast, host of the Bad Boy Running podcast, and the founder of Caffeine Bullet, David Hellard. David, thanks for coming on the show, man.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. How's the show going? I've been watching from afar, listening into the old one.
It's been going all right, man. It's kind of going live has its challenges, but yeah, I mean it's been fun. Like we're coming up to almost coming up to a year now. So with everything sort of going on with lockdown, we were stuck at home. So I thought, why don't we do something? But what about you? How's everything in London?
I mean, pretty awful if I'm honest, but I think we're all going through tough times, aren't we? And with trying to sell the flat, trying to buy a house, and that falling through, and wedding plans and various other things, it does seem like there's a lot that has gone wrong this year. But then it's such a weird circumstance in that we all know people who've had really bad years, like really bad, and so it just makes you thankful, actually. Even small things like the sun starting to shine and it not being dark at 5 o'clock, that is something that at the moment I'm pretty excited by, and so it does just change what your expectations are, doesn't it?
That's it. It's the little things. Whenever I do like a Zoom call with the family, it's like back in the UK, everyone's everyone's talking about what they're cooking and it brings it back to basics, I guess. So. Yeah,
absolutely.
Cool, man. I guess I'd love to jump in and almost go back to the beginning and where it all began and how you got into running.
Oh wow, that's fun. That's a long one. Who?
I mean, if it was something you thought like going back to school, if that was something where you kind of got interested in it then, or basically where did it begin?
I think I've got a typical youth in that we were forced to do cross country and we all hated it, especially as our cross country was on a Friday morning. So as soon as it finished, you knew you had the whole weekend coming. So your best time of the week was when you'd finish cross country, and then. From leaving school, I didn't do any sport, and apart from darts, obviously, great sport. And when I split up with an ex-girlfriend, I suddenly had all this time on my hands and didn't really know what to do. And also, it was at a point where I was socializing quite heavily and started to put on weight a bit. And I thought, this is I need to do something about this. And my dad was always something called a hash house harrier, who they call themselves the drinking club with the running problem. And I knew there was a club in London called City Hash. So I just joined them, and it's, no pressure running. You follow a trail. You don't know where you're going. No one knows who's running what speed, how far you've run, anything like that. It's all just chatting with people, social and lovely. And that then began my love of running, really, about 14 years ago. And just loved it ever since.
And since then, I mean, when were there any sort of races that you started doing? I mean, obviously then were you looking at a marathons at that time, or were you more sort of, it was just going running with mates? And
and probably took a year to do a race. Okay. And then it's interesting now when I think of myself then, and just didn't really train, had no expectations, walked halfway. I think I walked at mile 7 of my first half marathon, and was appalled myself to be overtaken by a guy in his 60s who looked like he was, should be in old people's home in my mind at the time. But I got drawn into that whole chasing marathon times and PBs. I think it's the almost the gold standard for how people measure themselves, and it's very easy to get drawn into that training schedule where a lot of people who are runners now, they almost set their their New Year's Day by it's the beginning of marathon season. I train and I do this, and I'm fit for the summer once I've done and you get brought into that and tied into that. But actually, I strange enough, a friend we know in common, Pete Reese, it turns out, along that journey, obstacle racing popped up, and I quite fancied doing it because it was just a really vibrant community, and also something new and so fun because you just didn't know what you'd expect on each race. It was still in the days before Tough Mudder, before Spartan, where no one had really settled on what an obstacle race should look like. And so every single race you'd turn up and you'd be running through fields or running down streets, and you'd suddenly see a huge thing in the distance, and you wouldn't even know what you're meant to do. You're like, do I get over it? I'm going to get under it. And so that was just so fun. But then it all became a bit serious and a bit too difficult for someone who, in essence, is just a runner. Really, I mean, look at those lack of guns, and kind of got drawn into ultra and been now loving. Well, I've been injured for quite a while recently, but I'd say now probably ultra is the thing that really excites me, and also ultra, but also anything that is really shiny or different or wacky or unusual, or I'm almost drawn to a story now more than results or more than times.
Yeah, and we've spoken previously about like some of the kind of crazy events that we've got on Rad Season, and the quirky runs. I mean, what do you reckon what's the appeal for those type of events to you reckon?
I think that it's just that element of unknown, and there comes a time where you can improve as a runner, but the amount of hours you've got to spend to improve by, in a marathon, a minute, and you're going to have to sacrifice months. And what happens if you get a slight niggle, or what happens if you trip on a bottle? You're not wasted, but you've spent 4 of your months trying to build up to something, and you're essentially tossing a coin as to whether you're going to be happy or completely destroyed by the results of this thing that you're not always in control of. Whereas these wacky events, it's partly because, similar to you actually, when we first messaged 5 years ago, we were just enjoying traveling around Europe, where instead of just going to a city and exploring by ourselves, we try and go to a place when it's at its best. And that normally is when they've got their own huge cultural event. And so before I was traveling around racing, I was traveling going to Martina or Pamplona or El Palio or the Oktoberfest. And so when races come along that offer you not only the ability to focus on a bit of training and really challenge yourself to do well, but then everything surrounding it is massive party and massive fun, because most of the quirky events are full of people who either don't take it too seriously, or take it way too seriously in quite an endearing way, or are there just because they are opening themselves up to something completely new. And people who do that, in my mind, are fun people. And so when you can combine those two together, it's just the best combination.
Yeah. And like looking back over all these events that you've done, like the unusual running ones, I mean, what sort of stands? Are there any kind of standouts for their own sort of uniqueness, or?
I mean, kind of think uniqueness. I mean, I don't think you can go wrong with Red Bull events. I know they're almost a rival brand now, but whenever Red Bull do a new event, if you do the first year of that event, it will be great. Whether that's the steeplechase, where you go up and down the fells, going via steeples, and they eliminate the last third every checkpoint. Whether you're doing things like the Rebel 400, we went to Austria and raced up a ski jump there, and it's just so hard. But everyone there in a similar way, it's because Red Bull are basically funding it. You get all this stuff for free. Everyone's in a great atmosphere, in a great mood, and you then take on these challenges against some of the best races in the world. I'm trying to think of smaller ones that people might not have heard of. I mean, I plugged my own one, the Beerathon, but I'll come back to you on that. I'd say the event that's not necessarily a running event that I adored was the World Snowshoeing Championships.
Yeah.
And a colleague, a friend from my running club, had interned with them as part of his university degree, and he mentioned it to me because he knew that I was drawn to anything that was slightly unusual. And Britain didn't have any entrance, so I wrote to them and said, "Can we be the British snowshoeing team?" And they thought that meant we were snowshoers, and therefore we're going to turn up with this delegation. You know, it's great for the sport. Whereas actually, I just emailed my best friends, who are a mix of some people who are sporty and also social, and some people who are very good at social and lesser at sporty. So then we went there. None of us had ever snowshoed before. Weirdly, in Italy, there was no snow, so they had to create a snowshoeing route with machines packing snow the whole way. And as events go, they had an opening ceremony. So we thought we're never going to go to the Olympics. This is our Olympics. So we all dressed in head to toe Union Jacks. We had cowboy hats with the Union Jack on, leggings, glittered jackets, and everyone else there was taking this as a quite serious event and were thinking about the next day's race. And so to then have 20 Brits all turn up in the most garish Union Jack enthusiasm in the heart of Brexit negotiations, it was just so super fun, and everyone really appreciated the fact that we took it so enthusiastically, even though we all came last. We were so bad, but yeah, things like that I just think are so wonderful.
Were there people like from all over the world taking part in?
Yeah, there were. There was a huge American delegation. There were. I mean, it's one of those sports where it, as you expect, it clings to the places that are cold in the winter. But we thought it was because unusually for World Championships, you could qualify just by applying, as opposed to having to be of any standard. And we had this cool runnings moment where we were driving in on the way to the start, and we saw the German team all side by side in pairs, warming up together in perfect formation. And we just thought, oh man, we came in here as fast runners thinking, come on, who's going to be good at snowshoeing? I reckon as a good runner, we'll figure out the technique halfway round. We could even win this thing. And then driving in at that point, we just realized how serious some of these people took it, and just how much they were going to wipe the floor with us. Did
you guys practice like any time before, or was you just rocked up on the starting line?
People, and actually I felt a bit bad about this. People hired their shoes the day before. I actually was writing for Outdoor Fitness magazine, so I'd written to the supplier of the fastest snow shoes and said, look, I'm going to be doing this. I'll promote your brand. Can you give me a really good set? Because I wanted to do well, and I hadn't tried them on before. Got to the start line and realized that I couldn't get them to fit my feet, and so I then had a 5K run back to pick up this small key to try and fit it to my actual shoes. I couldn't, and I ended up running a lap down on everyone and just running in my Innovate trainers, just holding my snowshoes, because I thought I've got to write an article, so I've actually got to take part in some way. And I mean, it goes against probably a lot of the rules and maybe even the ethos of snowshoeing, and particularly as I beat my missus, which she was really angry about because she knew I cheated. But it's the good thing is about if you do events that you haven't spent all your life training for and are unusual, you don't get disappointed by your results because you realize no one cares but you.
Yeah. And like, would you say like with some of these events, it was just getting a bit too serious? We want everyone kind of looking at PBs and I think there's definitely a place for that, and it's such a powerful tool to set yourself a target, and without that we wouldn't progress as people. And running has given me so much in that it's allowed me to create structure of my life.
I've never really dedicated myself to anything as much as I've dedicated myself to running at times. And particularly if you're going for these huge ultra races, you're spending, 100 miles, 120 miles a week just in training. And that is 90% alone. You're not, and at the end of that, you're tired and you haven't got great chat for your friends either. So it's a very selfish thing to do. But I'm not knocking people who are chasing times or who are trying to, I'm a podium seeker myself, but I think there's definitely a balance. And I've been finding out this last year, what happens when you can't run? What happens if everything that you pin your identity on, but also that you use for your own mental well-being is taken away from you? And actually, if you're just chasing PBs, then you're leaving yourself in a very risky situation should something go wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all for like we went to about 25 events when we moved over to Europe from Australia when we were living in Sydney. And it was always like, okay, let's pick a location that's doing something a little bit different when they have their main event on, and then that there's going to be a big party, and like you're definitely not going to regret experiencing it.
Is that what brought you over? So you could experience
yeah, so
more.
there's sort of like there's so many nuts things going on in Spain. Like we're in Portugal, but it's like every couple of weeks there's something crazy happening over there. When they open up the border again, I'll be across. But yeah, we were sort of like that's what brought us over to. And then all the unique things in France, in the UK, there's just a lot of variety. I mean, like with all the sort of, I guess, alcohol related marathons that have popped up, and you've done some pretty interesting ones, right? And like beer lovers. Have you done that like every year? You were saying,
I think they are the best events to do. Of some of my greatest memories and probably some of my least memories are from when I have a friend called Jess who works for Adidas. She's run 7 marathons and she's never run a marathon sober. And there's such a view. People have this, they put marathons on a pedestal, and a lot of people won't take them on because either they don't want to commit the time, or they're worried about the training, or they think it's so hard. They couldn't possibly do it. But actually, they have these events like we've done Medoc, we've done Beerathon's Marathon, the Croatian Wine Run, and they're all so fun because you're constantly stopping, you're constantly chatting to people, you're constantly drinking, and it takes your mind off the pain. And if you've never run before, we've had people who I'd call relatively overweight and unfit come and finish their first marathon. And something like the Beer Lovers Marathon, because it's quite a small event still, you're taking over a town, and your group just brings joy to every single person that they run into, because no one's aware of what this Beer Lovers Marathon is. And so they suddenly see 1,000 people all dressed as Smurfs who are all there just to say hello to people and and just to enjoy themselves. And I think it's the perfect blend of sports and fun. And we'll go back every year we can, because something like the Beer Lovers Marathon, every year is different because you go with different people, but the bits that are the same you look forward to, and it's a beautiful race even if you weren't to drink. And last year 2 years ago I was semi-injured, so I just jumped on bikes half the time, and we made shortcuts, and there's so much pressure on people in their racing. But you go to races like that and you realize actually there's such a different way to approach sport.
Yeah. And how is with the wine run? How is that, like the one in the Croatia? Because Medoc, I guess if you've looked into like these type of different marathons, Medoc obviously pops up, but the wine run in Croatia is still pretty small, right?
Yeah, and it sounds as if that's not going to happen again, which is really sad. And in terms of the runs out there, there aren't as many races along these lines that you think, you've got in the UK, you've got the Bacchus, which is still pretty small and actually not really of this similar to the other events in that you get a shot of wine, or they've now started the cider-thon. But the Croatian Wine Run, we've been to Medoc 3 or 4 times, and it's incredible, but it's really difficult to actually to register. It's a ball ache to get out there. Then you stay in the city, Bordeaux, but the actual the event itself is in Porliac, which is 90 minutes in a coach. So everything about everything about the event is brilliant, but everything around it is expensive in a ball ache. So we thought we'd try this Croatian wine marathon, and it was, I'd say probably my favorite boozy race I've ever done, in that it was so tiny, partly because it was in an area that was hard to get to, but theirs was quite a serious approach to it as well, where people were having a lovely time. And I don't think they quite expected to have 40 fancy dress Londoners turn up who were just going to cause carnage at every single drink stop. And we had our own police cars who were chaperoning us, who we ended up playing flip cup with, because they just realized after a while, these people will move on when they want, and I'm being paid to be here. And there's something that is so memorable about turning up to someone's vineyard and the owner's there, and they actually start opening up bottles from out the back and pouring you their favorite wines, because they're really proud of what they've created, and they want you to remember their vineyard and to buy in the future. And also because they just love wine. Or you get to a table and there's an old lady who can't speak any English, and she's got a tiny bit of bottle of a clear bottle that just has grappa written on it. And when that's gone, she then just shouts behind, and someone brings out another clear bottle that you just get these experiences that you can't replicate when you have big events. And we now try and seek, as a group and me personally, if there's something that is new or something that is small, and you can go there and just semi-overwhelm it with positivity and silliness, it just adds joy to everyone there. And that race, I was running it with some friends who they ended up getting the car back because they were just struggling with the distance. And so by the time I finished, because I got lost in the middle of the town and no one knew where it was, and I was dressed as this fairy and freaking out all these kids because this slightly drunk old fairy's running around, and got to the finish line, there's no one there because they'd all gone to a phone party. That is a marathon you want to go to, right? Where they don't bother to stay for the last runner because there's a phone party to be had.
That's so good. And what about like other unusual locations? You say like Afghanistan marathon. That's got to be up there.
Yeah. That's obviously a different type of race.
We're just switching now. It's just like, all right.
You're certainly not going to
I was just thinking of what kind of unusual runs have you done? And I know that one.
Well, there's this amazing company called Untamed Borders, and they organise marathons in places around the world, areas of conflict, but also they arrange trips to places that people wouldn't think to go, whether it's Somaliland or Afghanistan. And I always find that if you go to the first edition of a race, for one, the locals haven't figured out how to marathon run yet. So when they get to the 18 mark, they will hit the wall. And so you can do quite well compared to year 2. But also there's almost this, it's just so nice to see a sport brought to a country and to get a sense of actually, there's so many, I think we actually underplay now the power of sport and the power, the positive power running can be, because it almost is such a cliche that we hear it too often for you to believe it to be true. But with Afghanistan, they put their first marathon on there, and strangely enough, they actually had ski trips previously to the same area. There's there in Afghanistan that is beautiful, called Bamyan, where it's where Genghis Khan came through in the past. So they look more Mongolian than what you traditionally think of Afghani. They have a lot of Buddhism in their heritage, so it's where they had the biggest freestanding Buddha built into their caves before, sadly, the Taliban blew it up. And so we went to this area of incredible natural beauty, flown in undercover as if we weren't there at all. And then they put on a marathon where, what I hadn't realized before, there's actually a charity there called Free to Run, who'd been encouraging girls to run in the local area, where this is a country that, you know, the women are second-class citizens, very much so, by law and by culture. But we got to the start of this race, and there were tens and tens and tens of girls who all wanted to run this 10K. And the excitement of seeing them, but also in the marathon itself, we started off, and I'd had the trots, unfortunately, the day before. And so I'm probably in the worst state I've ever started a marathon, and having a terrible time, having to nip to the toilets. And it's quite weird when you have to duck behind a rock to have another toilet break, to see yourself, to look up and see someone with a machine gun laughing at you, because there's an armed escort from the army, because one of the local ministers is taking part in the race. But the locals all set off as if it was a 200-meter race, because they'd never considered what the marathon was. I don't think many of them really understood what the actual distance was. And if you've never run long distance, you just have no concept of, well, will I slow down? Or why would I slow down? And I just loved that excitement at the start, where people were already buckling over after about 300 meters. And then I came through the half marathon, halfway point. I thought in second place, and it turned out I was already in fourth place. And a lot of the locals were jumping on motorbikes and then getting lifts ahead and then getting off and running. So I kept on kind of overtaking these individuals as you'd pass them, and they became this cat and mouse, where they knew you knew, and they didn't want to cheat in front of you because they knew it was cheating. But at the same point, they needed to get ahead of you. And so they then start dressing up in clothes and borrowing bikes. And it became this. And I mean, yeah, I'd gone there with the intent of winning it. That was out the window when, firstly, my roommate Keith was faster rather than I, but also with my illness. And then when you get to a place like that and you see you just experience the fact that they've got a completely different expectation on what is fair play. And at the finish, it turned out that the local minister had jumped in a car of the 10K and driven to the finish and kind of jogged in, not really realizing how the timing had worked, and ended up coming third and had to. So there was a bit of a political situation where he had to try and back out of that. But in the local culture, there were different villages that were rivals and hoping to win. But actually, the only person from Afghanistan who didn't cheat and who finished it was a woman. And when she came in, it was incredible, because you could genuinely sense the mood at the finish line change, because women are second-class citizens there, and yet she had finished it without cheating, and none of the men had. And that's what's so great about going to new countries, is that you can see how when a sport begins there, it really has an impact on how people perceive themselves, and then how others perceive them. And they've now brought the free to run is now in Iran, and it's in a lot of other countries, and actually it's making a huge difference towards equal rights, which you just wouldn't think running would do. So there's that's the good thing about the more unusual the place, the better the stories, and also probably the more chance you've got to win it. So, which is doubly good for someone like myself.
And now when things start opening up again, I mean, are there any events or any places that have been on your bucket list, so to speak, or any kind of things that you really want to do?
I've always wanted to do the Badwater in America. I love heat, and it just seems like an extreme challenge where you have to rely on, if you don't know it, it's maybe 135 miles, maybe a bit more, but it's through Death Valley, the hottest place on earth, and you have to run on, it's all on road, but you have to run on the white strips or else your trainers will melt. It's that hot. And I love the idea of the race, but also you really have to rely on your support crew because it's very easy to overheat. And so they will have ice baths, and you will have to constantly be hosed down in ice to not dehydrate. Just to get through, right? Wow. Yeah. So I mean, in terms of actual races, that's on there. I still haven't done a 100-miler, which I say that from our podcast point of view, it almost seems like a rite of passage that one of my co-hosts, Ali, she seems to do them every other day. Jody, who is the person I started the podcast with, he's done several now, and that's the one. That's almost I'd love to do the Badwater. This is one I feel like I have to do for my own self-esteem and self-worth. In terms of fun events, to a certain extent, I mean, Burning Man has always slightly intrigued me, but I suspect that it's maybe a bit too cool for me. Maybe a bit too, it just seemed that it's a little bit too look at me and how great am I to be here rather than look how silly I am. Costume. Yeah, look how silly I am. How can I make your experience better? But I'm trying to think of other ones in Europe because we've not done the Orange one yet, the Orange Train Festival. That looks quite cool. Yeah. You've mentioned the trombone playing festival in Serbia.
Gucha, yeah, that's definitely one to add. It's crazy. It's in this village in the middle of nowhere, in the center of Serbia, called Gucha, and they basically get 30,000 people there, and all the trumpet bands from all over Eastern Europe and the Balkan states kind of descend on this little village for like a 5-day party. It's like all day and all night. And it's basically like you just eating. You're at a restaurant. There's all these pop-up restaurants, and then these bands just come and play around you, busking. And then you sort of give them money, and they jump on the table, and yeah.
And I've never heard of that. I've never, it's not even. I've got friends from Serbia and Croatia. It's never, it's not even hit my radar. There's so many great events like that.
If you say Gucha like to someone from Serbia, and they're like, "Oh, you don't go there," and then you say like, oh, "We're going to go with our 3-year-old," and then they look at you like you've lost it. They're like, "No, don't do it." So like that's epic. Like Ballad of the Oranges, I'd love to like that. That's what I want to do.
But the TV show Home Game had, I can't remember the event, and I doubt we'd be able to get in a way that wouldn't be slightly dangerous or intruding. But have you seen Home Game?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, the first episode where they talk about it's almost a hybrid between boxing, rugby, and football.
Oh, okay. Calicia Storica. It's like almost like medieval. It's like Gladiators meets football, right? Like it should be. It looks like so it should be incredible.
Yeah. And just as an experience goes, I can't think of many events that would be as intense as that. So but I also don't think as a Westerner, it would necessarily be a good idea to go to that. You'd either have to pay £1,000 a ticket, or I can imagine you might not necessarily be, welcome with open arms from the locals, given we're going there for fun as opposed to respect, which you probably need for that a bit more.
So you had Flo on your podcast recently, and like have you ever done cheese rolling? Like she was the champion.
Oh, she
Multiple time champion for cheese rolling in Gloucestershire, and yeah, I was curious if you've ever tried it. Have you done that?
No, have you?
No. We went there, and then I just looked at it and I thought, right, it was the first event of the 25 festivals and events that we were going to go to, and I just kept on seeing the stretch like go up and down the hill. And I was like, no. Like if there's just people like breaking, like twisting ankles was kind of the common one. A few collarbones.
Yeah, I mean I haven't been skiing for years because I've feared of hurting my leg and not being able to run for months and months at a time. And that would be the same with that. I mean, Flo, she entered each time not expecting to race on the day. And you think she's won it 4 times and she's absolutely bust up her ankle. She's still got a visible bump at her collarbone. You think if she's the best person at it, she's had 50% really bad injuries. So I'd certainly want to go and watch. And I've had a friend called Pork Pie who's been before, and he very much just shuffled down and ended up being booed by the crowd for being so sheepish about it. But yeah, I guess I value my health too much to have a go. Maybe when I'm in my my 80s, where I think, oh, there's not much left to live for. Maybe that's the time you think, what way to go, right?
That's it. Just you could just bounce down,
Yeah.
It's mental, that event. So like going back to the podcast and with the people that you've had on, you guys started that in 2015, is that right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, about that. I mean, it seems it's flown by, and you'll probably find the same, that you suddenly get to a stage and you look back and you just don't know how you got there. But I'd say podcasting is one of the things I love the most. I just love being able to talk to people, but also being able to, if you now being in a position where Flo, for example, we saw the show on Netflix, and obviously we were all in absolute awe of her, and just being able to go, great, I've kind of got this thing now that I can say to her, hey, why don't you hang out with me? Because of this. And instead of going, no, you weirdo, she'll go, okay. And it's such a nice way to be able to meet essentially my heroes from around the world. I mean, genuine heroes now, who people like Dean Karnassis, who pretty much popularized ultra running single-handedly, and people like Laz, who did the Barking Marathons, or Camille Herons, and Justin Hawkins from The Darkness. I mean, they don't always follow the theme of kind of loosely around running. If there's someone we really want to interview who we think we can, we'll just try and get them on. We're trying to get we're trying to get some boxers on at the moment, but they're not having any of it. So,
and why did you guys start it originally? What was the reason behind that?
Mainly, I mean, it's strange because it's 5 years now, so I'm no longer sure if the reasons I think are genuinely the reasons I think, or just I've given a reason of why enough times that's my memory of what I say. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But Jody, he's the co-presenter, co-founder. I'd actually met him doing the Sierra Marathon and invited him out to write, because I was helping out with their PR, and said, come and experience it and run it. And we got on so well, and we'd meet up every few months because he lived in Brighton. And whenever we did, we'd just have such a good time talking just talking drivel about running that we truly loved. But but the conversations we were having, they just weren't anywhere else in the media. You didn't get that in magazines, and Marathon Talk was going at the time, but I wasn't aware of that. And so we thought, why don't we do this together? Like, we love doing this. Why don't we form a podcast? And particularly at that stage, the podcasts that we knew that were famous were all really good, and so you thought, great, we can be that. Whereas now you think, maybe I won't do a podcast because there's a lot of bad ones around. But they were also mainly humor as well, people like Adam Buxton and Ricky Gervais. And so we thought, why don't we do a running podcast that is mainly focused on fun and silliness? And we can be serious about running at times, but we're just going to be honest about what running is to us. And most of the time, that is the stories where it goes wrong than where it goes right. But it's really grown into a really big community now, and we've met so many wonderful people. We've got our own running club. We now host and curate the ultra stage at the National Running Show. So it's just blossomed in ways that I just didn't really think. We did it for fun. We've never tried to really. We don't have a Patreon. We do take sponsorships sometimes, but actually we turn down more than we've had because we just want to be honest with our listener about products and not say get this just because of money. And I really hope it will just continue forever, because the good thing is about podcasts, if you want it to continue forever, it will continue forever because no one can stop you. But other than time and politics. But I mean, we're such good friends, and now our lives are such a part of other people's lives that actually we've got this whole community of people that are really supportive of everything we do. And it's just so nice to see people who are running their first ultras or even have actually been inspired to go for a run, having listened to it because they found it quite funny. And especially this year, it's been a pretty dark year for most people. And to be able to have a community of people that aren't just wallowing and will take the piss and try and make you smile. I think it's really important at times.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. And I mean, you've got quite a lot going on. So with that, and then you're also running your own company, which is Caffeine Bullet. Could you tell us more about that? Like how did that all come about?
Yeah, that's so I was running in, I've always used caffeine loads whenever I've raced, because depending on how you process it, it's pretty much a wonder drug. It's the only legal drug in my mind that actually makes a difference, and it wasn't legal for a number of years because it is so potent. So I always used to use either gels, and just didn't like using caffeine gels when I ran, partly because by the time you need your caffeine, it's towards the end of a race, and half the time when you race, by the time you get to the end, you don't want gels anymore and your stomach's shot. But also, if you've just taken a gel and you suddenly need your caffeine, you're going to have to wait before you take your next gel. So I'd start using Pro Plus tablets, and I cut out these little tabs and I put them in my pocket. At times they go missing, at times I pop it out and disappear. And I was in the Marathon Des Sables on day 2 when I just had an absolute shocker, and unexpectedly, I think I was maybe got a bit excited because I was running with a guy called Jason Slab, who was he's like won Lenhill 100 and all that. And I was like, hey, I've got a new buddy who's super cool. Oh, great. And maybe got carried away with the pace. And massively hit the wall and dropped caffeine pill in the sand. And I was like, wow, why isn't there a product that just allows you to really get an intense caffeine kick that's pleasant and convenient, that's not a gel or a tablet? So went out and researched it, and there was nothing out there that did it. And so just thought, I've quite enjoyed doing projects of let's see what happens with, and just thought let's give it a go. Yeah. And I'd been in startups previously, and when I left ZipCube, my last startup, it got to the stage of right, okay, well, I'm either going to have to make this a proper company or I'm going to have to get another job. So it's kind of, thankfully the product's really good. And it's kind of grown from there. And now I'm in this really lucky place where I guess I've transitioned from working in a job previously in a management consultancy where I couldn't care less about the job. but it paid for my life and could then have my passions, to have now transitioned where everything is part of the same. It's got symbiosis, I guess, because Caffeine Bullet is for sports. And so anytime I'm running, I'm promoting Caffeine Bullet. That's what I justify it to my head when I'm spending so much time running. And similar with the podcast, it all links together. And so now we're, Caffeine Bullet, it's gone really, really well. It's still not the perfect product yet. But it's gone really well, actually. Lockdown's been an absolute nightmare for us to a certain extent, because no one's racing, and you typically use it to get that extra 10%. And there aren't that many people who are training crazy hard or who are racing. It's not where it hopefully will be when we get out of lockdown. But when we launched Chocolate Orange, the response was so crazy that after that, I finally had that calm of like, oh, thank goodness, like I can get a salary from this at some point, because I'd had a bit of pressure from the missus, understandably, rightly. So thanks, Britty. And so, it was more than anything just a huge relief to actually to have some success, and to be able to, and just so nice to think, actually, hopefully for the rest of my life, I can just do things that I love. And
right?
And being able to, like, the top British ultra, a guy called Dan Lawson, just messaging like, can I get some more bullets? I need them, please. And being able to just send them out to people who are doing these amazing things and know that you're part of that. It's just so super nice.
That's cool. And what's the next stage for you guys? Are you going to try and, is there any like new products that are going to come out, or?
I've actually got quite a few product ideas. I just can't find anyone to make them. I mean, the next step is trying to get product back into Europe. So if you're watching this from anywhere in Europe, I'm sorry, I just can't figure it out. I've really tried. So it's already been turned back from France because DHL don't import food. They didn't tell me that. Been turned out from Germany. Spain, Portugal. I'll send them to you, Ollie. I'll send them to you. But I mean, I really believe in. I mean, the chew itself is so good. And good, if you look at things like Red Bull, these are huge global companies based off one product that not many people love. I mean, it's a super cool brand and super cool company, but do you really want to reach for Red Bull that often? Does anyone go, oh, wow, that's delicious? So my view is that actually we can grow this brand to be really big, because it's faster, it's smaller, it's cheaper, it's nicer. And while I do have ideas for other products, I'm already aware that I do a lot of things already. So diluting the core purpose of the company, but I also don't really want to make something just for the sake of having more product lines. I'm only going to make something if I really believe in it. I've got one idea that I think would be really useful for runners, but it's surprisingly hard to actually find manufacturers. And with our chew, for example, it's not perfect. The wrapper itself, we're stuck with the tooling we've got. We're stuck with the machinery. We can't change the size. We can't change the shape. We can't change the wrapper. They're all hand packed, which is why, I mean, it costs us a huge amount just for them individually put in to seal it. And so a lot of people have this view in their head that we're in such a high tech world where things come so easily to, if you want to set up a website, you just do this, you do that. Whereas actually something like manufacturing, the machines can only do one thing. And if you want to put like this bottle in a bag like this, you've got to either do it by hand or you've got to design a specific machine to do that. And we manufacture 5-6 times a year. And so for us to be able to buy a machine, we'd have to get a warehouse, and we'd want to really be producing on that 200 days a year. So until we're 20 times, 30 times bigger, unfortunately, we're stuck with what we've got. And I just can't find anyone who can make this new idea for us. So the quest continues. We still want to do a vegan one because there's egg white powder in it. But yeah, unfortunately, you want to make the perfect product, but actually it's really hard to do that without having millions behind you.
Yeah. And like over the years doing that, I mean, if someone was kind of looking to start their own venture, the things that you've learned along the way, what would be, I guess, your one kind of takeaway piece of advice that you give somebody?
I think the main one is just start doing it. It's more prevalent now, the idea of a side hustle, but a lot of people are, particularly if it's your passion. I mean, the best ideas are either the best companies are either where you just rip off the company you work for and use the skills you already have, or you start to do something where you've got your passion, because then you can do that work without it feeling like a second job. But there's so much you can actually do chipping away with a full-time job still. And I'd also say ask. Yeah. You realize the power of numbers in terms of ideas and skills is really, really significant. And we almost crowdsourced a lot of the designs and a lot of the ideas. And Kim, who did our logo, she's a friend from obstacle racing. She's amazing. And everything we did, we'd ask like which flavors, and we'd ask our friends, or what do you think of the tagline? And a lot of people don't do things because they're worried about their skills. But the reality of life at the moment is, you know, I could, if someone said, can you perform brain surgery? I could say yes if you pay me enough money. And then I hire someone to do brain surgery for me. And now it's so easy to find every skill, either on Upwork or on LinkedIn or amongst your friends. And so whatever it is that you need to do, if you've got a good idea, you can find the skills and the people to do it. And if it's a good idea, those people want to be involved. And but the other thing I'd say is there is a price to free, and that is it just can be slow at times. So but just start doing things, and they won't always work, but you really enjoy that process, and you'll get better skills. And you know, I had a running bungee cord that attached between camelbacks called Camel Toe that I created. I launched it. I bought 2,000 of them. I realized, I bought 2,000, did all the design. And I then walked into the pound shop and found out that someone had already created almost exactly the same bungee and they're selling for £1. So they're still sat in some factory warehouse in China. 1,900 of them. But yeah, I mean, and I've done t-shirts where I just sold t-shirts online with someone. I had an idea, people would draw them for me, and I'd sell them for a few quid. And all these things, none of them were roaring successes. The Beerathon, you know, it's all for charity, but each one of them I've learned a new skill, or I've grown in confidence. And so when Caffeine Bullet came along, you know, I now know Photoshop, and actually I knew a bit more about web design and so yeah, and anything new that you do is something that you can use in the future, even if that's not a success. So just get started,
get stuck in, right? That's it. Good advice, man. And what other projects, either like running wise or anything else, have you got coming up this year?
It's hard to, well, in theory a wedding, but who knows if that will happen. The big ones this summer, because I'm injured, has been more about the shows. So I'm going to be at a place called Run Fest Run. The Beerathon, I've got to find a new venue for, because unfortunately the pub's closing down. We're hosting the Ultra stage again at the Run Show South. Something I'd really like to do, and if you know anyone, listeners who can help, would be great. Had the idea of something called Donate My Medal. So as runners, and as athletes, we have so many medals that we sometimes treasure, sometimes don't. And the simple idea, we just collect them and then we give them to hospices to give out to children who are ill as as encouragement. So putting that together at the moment. with the running show. Yeah, and the hospices mostly have been really, really excited about it. So that's something I'm hoping we can get off the ground. We'll be collecting at the run show, assuming that it all makes sense to do that. Outside of that, I really don't have many plans. My diary is almost determined by other people's rescheduled things. But the main plan is just to party like it's 1999 as soon as we can. And that's just, it's just going to be so nice. And I'm not having plans, partly because they've changed, but also we don't need them. Just the ability to go and have a beer with your friend in a pub. I mean, it's gonna feel so great. Let alone going to a gig that you booked 2 years ago from an artist who's no longer good, but it's a live gig or whatever it may be. So, but racing wise, I'm not really sure what direction I'll be going. I certainly want to do a couple of those big races. For a while, I've been tinkering with, do I want to be one of these big running influencers and doing, some epic FDAT over months and months? And I've realized actually, as you've probably realized yourself from listening to me, I enjoy people too much and don't really want to be out there for days alone, because it's not what I'm about really. So I think I'll probably end up just seeking more fun at different places and trying to get as many people involved in that as possible.
That's awesome. What's the best way for people to reach out to you? Either for Caffeine Bullet or
Caffeine Bullet.
If they want to follow what you're up to. Yeah,
I'm not actually that active on social media personally, just because I find myself too busy, and also I almost don't like the impersonal nature of it, and I have a guilt if I post something and I haven't responded to everyone who's messaged. But Bad Boy Running is everywhere as Bad Boy Running or Bad Boy Running Podcast. Mm-hmm. If you message that, it's going to come through to me. I'm just David Hellard in pretty much every website and everything on earth, because there aren't many of us. And Caffeine Bullet, similarly, Jennifer helps with social media. She's great, but all the emails come through to me. The website all comes through to me. But I'm quite an easy person to find. And, honestly, if you have any questions or if you need any help with something, or if you know anyone who works at a hospice that we can link up with the medals, or if you've got a super cool race that you want us to cover or event, we will be up for that. Let me know, because we're always looking for the next fun thing to do.
Awesome. Cool, man. Well, it's been really good chatting to you, David. Thanks for your time, man. And we've definitely got to catch up on some of these crazy races as and when they're happening.
Definitely. And if anyone wants to try Caffeine Bullet, I've created a discount code, 25% off your first order for Rad Season. Although, if you're in Europe, I don't know if it's going to get to you. I'm going to be honest. We'll see. Hopefully by the time you listen to this. But we're figuring out things, and we're most places in the world now.
Awesome. Cheers, man.
Cheers, Ali.
Thanks.